Ricardos is a 2021 film written and directed by Aaron Sorkin and centers around Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz and how they dealt with one particularly tense, difficult week in 1952 when several crises and issues all kind of came to a head and they were unsure whether or not their series I Love Lucy was going to be able to continue. Ever since the movie ended, I've been trying to figure out whether or not I think Nicole Kidman gave a good performance as Lucille Ball. And I don't know. I think the problem when you're having an actor play someone who so many people are familiar with and where there's so much reference material where we know how this person speaks and what they look like, the problem is that the whole time we're trying to compare the actor and their impression to the real life person that we all know so well. And because that was such a focus of first when Nicole Kidman got the part, that was a big focus of, how is she going to look, how is she going to sound, and when the trailers came out, they were just kind of brief snippets of how she looked and all of that, that once I was watching the movie, I was doing the same thing again. I was focusing on that and constantly analyzing and gauging the accuracy of her impression. I found it pretty hard to see past the makeup and the prosthetics that they were using to try and make her resemble Lucille Ball as much as possible. But just to start with a positive, I think her stage voice as Lucy Ricardo in I Love Lucy is great. And we don't see a lot of it, which is too bad because I think she really nailed that part of it. But also the look, like her hair and makeup, and there's brief black and white clips of the show and of the episode that they're doing and a few other episodes. And in those, I think she does a fantastic job. I think if you close your eyes, you can barely tell the difference between her impression of her voice and Lucille Ball's voice as Lucy Ricardo. Also, when she's speaking in a lower tone, I think there too she does the voice very well. Maybe more so sounds like Lucy from The Lucy Show or from Here's Lucy, more of an older voice, a bit more husky or raspy. But there too, you can see how close she got. But a lot of the time, her regular speaking voice just sounds like Nicole Kidman with an American accent. So the times when the accent is so good almost drew me out of the movie more than when it didn't, because for large swaths of the movie, you're just hearing American Nicole Kidman, basically. And you kind of get used to that, and when there's all of a sudden a brief scene where she sounds spot on, it kind of surprises you and takes you out of it, and you start analyzing again, which I think can be a bit of a problem. The whole time I was kind of comparing to the movie Hitchcock, starring Anthony Hopkins. And there too, heavy prosthetics, lots of makeup, but they weren't trying to match Alfred Hitchcock's look exactly. And I don't think Anthony Hopkins' voice totally sounded like Alfred Hitchcock the whole time either, which is fine. I think you're trying to give an idea of the person and give the feel of the person. But when you're trying to go so exact, I think that's almost more distracting for the audience than anything. Part of the problem too, I think, is the writing for Lucille Ball as a character. I think she's shown as not being very funny personally. I mean, in the week, I guess I should explain what is all happening during this week. They've kind of compressed the timeline of events down to a week in 1952 where Lucille Ball is being accused to be a communist. And this is all during the 1950s Red Scare, the House Un-American Activities Committee, where people were being brought in for hearings and trying to determine who was or wasn't a communist in Hollywood. So that's the bulk of the conflict in the movie. But there's also a major tabloid story that's come out about the possibility of Desi cheating on Lucy, as well as Lucy and Desi announcing to the studio executives and their managers and agents that Lucy's pregnant and how they would like to work that into the show. And of course those three things didn't all happen at once. The specific tabloid story that they're referencing was apparently from the mid-1940s. The hearing where Lucy testified before Congress was in 1953, and the pregnancy was in there somewhere, but they're just trying to fit it all into one movie to tell all these stories at once. So with all those issues going on, it makes sense why they're not trying to show Lucy as being a hilarious person the whole week, because there's a lot of stressful things going on. But there's very, very few moments where you're getting a glimpse of Lucille Ball, the comedian. It's all quite cold, calculating, controlling. That's a big part of the movie too, which maybe they're trying to hint at her future of taking over Desilu and being the first female studio head in Hollywood, basically. Maybe they're trying to hint towards that. But that controlling aspect of overriding the director's authority on set and all of that, and controlling Vivian Vance, I'll get into that a little bit later. But that whole part of it just kind of puts you off. It gives a very unlikable impression of Lucy, which I don't know how accurate that is, but in a way I don't really care how accurate it is, because I like the shows that she was in and I like her comedy style, and that's the risk of watching movies about actors or celebrities, I guess, is that you might come away not liking that person so much, and I know that going in, that's a possibility of what could happen. But I think that kind of takes away from your enjoyment too. If you're a big fan of hers and you're seeing her as this kind of cold person that a lot of people are afraid of, and I mean, she's a lot of people's bosses, so it makes sense they're intimidated by her, but it doesn't help the audience with enjoying the movie. A lot of it is focused on showing her as a tough businesswoman, and how her and Desi were in control of a great deal of the show and the direction of it, and how much power they had due to the popularity of the show within their first couple of years already. And I mean, that's interesting, but I think if you can balance that with the fact that she is a beloved comedian, that would have maybe come across better and probably would have made me enjoy it more. There was also a weird aspect of continually showing how people that she's speaking to wouldn't know whether or not she was joking when she said something. And there too, maybe it's accurate. Her kids are listed as executive producers on the show, so maybe that was an aspect, that she would say these very borderline serious, threatening things and people wouldn't understand right away whether or not she was kidding. But that is also not that much fun to watch, and kind of gives you a bad feeling, or an uncomfortable feeling for the people that she's talking to. And I never get that impression watching Lucy in her shows she's acting, but in interviews or the Dean Martin roasts or whatever. Again, it's all kind of a performance that you're seeing, but you'd think you'd see some aspect of that inner tough or not friendly nature come out. So I just think for people that don't know Lucille Ball, this is not really a good introduction. I think there are a lot of things shown that, whether or not they're accurate, again, I'll say maybe they are, they're not that much fun to watch. And if you don't know that character or that person in any way, I think it could be not a great way to be introduced to her. Javier Bardem plays Desi Arnaz, and I think he was quite good. I think his performance does ride that line of coming across as charming, which I think he likely was, but also showing those unsavory aspects of his personality, or of him as a person. I mean, it's, again, a major storyline of it is his cheating on Lucy. So they're not hiding any of that, but they show why he was a popular celebrity, and his charm, of how he dealt with people and how he could exert his power when he wanted to, but still had kind of an easygoing way about him while talking to people on set. And I think that came across good. I think looks-wise, he doesn't look very much like Desi Arnaz in the face, but just kind of the silhouette, with the hair and the wide suits and all of that, had a good look. His voice is obviously much lower than Desi Arnaz's was, but I think he has the accent down pat, and his manner of speaking, that kind of fast, clipped, accented voice of his, I think comes across really well. So there too, he's kind of giving the impression of Desi Arnaz while not doing an imitation of him totally. It's just you get the idea and you're not being drawn in and out of the movie trying to gauge that, because it's all settled into this kind of one mode where it's like him but not an exact replica. J.K. Simmons plays William Frawley, who played Fred Mertz on I Love Lucy, and I think he's the best part of the movie. He's my favorite part of the movie. Part of that's probably just down to J.K. Simmons. I think he can often be the best part of whatever movie he's in, and can be a really fun character, and he is here too. I think he's got a good look as William Frawley. I mean, they get the hair right, and I think J.K. Simmons is probably a bit taller than William Frawley actually was, so they're trying to make him look shorter and heavier. So in certain scenes it kind of looks like it's his head almost floating on top of this shorter, squat body. But overall, I think he comes across maybe the best of the central quartet of characters, I guess. I think he definitely gets the funniest lines in the movie. He has the funniest scenes, whether that's with Desi, mostly with Lucy though. I think he's kind of portrayed as a older, wiser mentor figure in some ways, despite his own problems. I mean, it's referenced several times that he was an alcoholic, and that is true from real life of what I know. But he's still seen as being able to give advice to Lucy and able to help her when she needs it. Nina Arianda plays Vivian Vance, who played Ethel Mertz in the series, and I'm not really sure how to take her character as a whole. The look, and that's probably why she was cast, she has basically the right look in the face to kind of match Vivian Vance, but we never see clips from the series of her playing Ethel. So you don't really get a good sense of whether she's playing that side of it very well. A major focus of it is, again, showing that controlling nature of Lucille Ball, is how Lucy wanted Vivian Vance to stay not looking too thin or anything, didn't want to look too glamorous for the show. She's supposed to be the wife of Fred Mertz, and it wouldn't make sense if Fred was married to this thin, very attractive woman. And that's a constant source of tension between the two of them. And it's mentioned once or twice that they're best friends, but you never get that sense. You never see them interacting as you'd think friends would. It's all very much kind of a bitter relationship from Vivian Vance's side, and a boss talking to an employee relationship when Lucy stops by to talk to her in her dressing room or anything like that. I don't think her voice matched hers. I don't really know what Vivian Vance sounded like off camera, so who knows if that's accurate at all, but that character was probably the weakest of the main four. I don't think the movie was that well written, actually. I know Aaron Sorkin is a very famous screenwriter, television writer, and all of that, but I don't think the movie was overall very well written. There are quite a few lines that are obvious attempts at humor, but I don't remember laughing at any of them, other than, as I said, J.K. Simmons. I thought some of his lines were very good, but a lot of the humor focuses around, there's a female writer that works on the show, and the constant acknowledging how much smarter she is than one of the other writers, a man who works on the show. There are mostly two writers that are shown, and their banter back and forth is just not funny at all. I think it's pretty obvious jokes and nothing that really stood out. And as I said, didn't make me laugh. I watched it with a few people and nobody else was laughing either. So I don't think it was just us. I just don't think those jokes really came across very well. There's also some probably intended to be modern or topical dialogue, whether that's about feminism type issues or race or what can be shown or what is acceptable on television. And all of that too was just very easy subjects to go to, and very, very on the nose dialogue that seemed very very lazy, I guess. I mean, it was trying to show, oh, it's the same issues now have been were dealt with in the 50s. I think we kind of get that nothing ever is really that new, that the issues that people deal with today are not that different from, in the 50s or even earlier. So that was pretty weak, I thought. I mentioned earlier about what the three main issues are that they're dealing with that week. And I think there was one too many. I really feel like the storyline of Desi cheating on Lucy, while true and while based in reality, I think they went to that way too many times. Every time something else would happen regarding the pregnancy storyline or regarding the communist storyline, Desi might be trying to talk about how they can get through this communist accusation, and right away Lucy's back to the cheating thing, which makes sense. It would be on her mind, but it was just such a central focus of the movie, even so much as that the final title card is about that and regarding their divorce, and they were divorced in 1960. So it's 8 years later, so I mean it's hinting that it's an ongoing issue throughout their marriage and all of that. But going back to that over and over made it kind of repetitive, and when the movie was already getting pretty long, when those scenes would just go back to the same issues and kind of similar conversations over and over, I just don't think that worked very well or was a good use of the movie's runtime. So the writing, I think, kind of guided this movie towards kind of being a downer, a downbeat story, which I don't think is what this movie should have been. Based on the trailers, the trailers almost seemed like they were for a different type of movie. When they had the I Love Lucy theme slowly coming in during the trailer, and these little snippets of their recreations of the show and of all of the actors playing these very famous television characters. All of that kind of seemed like they were trying to recapture the magic of this show, which is legendary. Everyone knows it, I think. I mean, most people do anyway. And when we're left with this kind of downbeat story and the final takeaway is regarding their marriage breakup, it just leaves you kind of with a icky feeling afterwards. And that's not what I wanted from a movie about a show that I watched growing up and I still enjoy. Just to talk a bit about the visuals, I think overall the movie just has a very kind of blah look. A lot of it is set in the soundstage where they tape the show, and everything kind of has this brownish tinge to it. And maybe that's how it looked, I don't know, but this is a movie set in Hollywood in the 50s. I think if there's ever an excuse to go for a colorful palette for a movie, this would be it. Maybe they're trying to get away from that nostalgic reminiscence of what Hollywood in the golden age looked like. I don't know, but it just kind of had this dark look. And even when they're taping the show at the end of the movie, when they're actually taping the episode, the sets and everything are kind of still darkly lit. And when you go back and watch the original show, it didn't look like that. It was very brightly lit. It didn't go for that moody, dark cinematography like this, which obviously that's all stylistic. Everything is a choice when you're making a movie. But when you're trying to match characters' looks so exactly, why not match the look of the set and the show that you're focused around? The sets themselves look great when you can see them. They're very dark and just don't have the look that you'd hope to see when you're seeing a recreation of this set. I will say though that the black and white scenes do look great. So when they're actually showing a recreation of a scene from the show, it does look like the show. And that's when the characters look best too, because it's just these kind of fleeting glimpses, and they look really, really good and they look really accurate. But when they're rehearsing for the show, everything kind of has they're acting broadly because it's for a live audience. That's how acting in front of a studio audience would be, I imagine. It just comes across as kind of too broad and unfunny, and when you're kind of focused in these characters' problems and bitterness the rest of the time, seeing them try to perform a comedic scene just doesn't evoke memories of how funny those characters actually were in the show, and doesn't portray that very well in the rehearsal side of it, I should say. But if you go back to the original series, it is hilarious. It's very funny to this day. So I think having them play it in a way that comes across as actually funny would have been better. There's a framing device for the movie where it starts with three people, the executive producer, one writer from the show, and another executive from the studio, I think, in their elderly years being interviewed about this week. And I wasn't sure how that was all going to be used. I don't know if it's added that much to it. They cut back to them periodically to emphasize a point, or most commonly that's used to try and introduce a flashback, which is, I think, the movie's way of being able to show other things other than just the events of that week at Desilu Studios, when they're cutting back to the first meeting of Lucy and Desi, and to when Lucy was doing the radio program My Favorite Husband, and how that got the interest of CBS to pick it up as a sitcom, and just how that all converted over. So that's their way of being able to show that while still in the context of this one week. So I guess that works that way, but other than that, the commentary that those three interview subjects provide doesn't bring that much to it for me. Going on from that, it does go through Monday to Friday, starting with a table read, and that part was quite interesting too, I thought. How seeing the actors and the writers and the producer all together there, and just kind of the mechanics of how a sitcom is worked on and how a scene is born. All of that was very interesting. There too, I mean, they're showing Lucy always kind of technically breaking down the humor in something, which it's probably how people do that when they're making a comedy show or a comedy movie. You're always breaking it down to see why is that funny, what's the logic behind it, and that's interesting. There were a few scenes where they fixate on, and they go through that quite a few times, but it was interesting just to see that side of it. Carrying on from there, the week goes through blocking rehearsals and the rehearsal the day before taping, and that was all quite interesting too. While they're working on the show, there is something they do a few times, which is, as a scene is being discussed, they'll kind of close in on a reverential close-up on Lucy's face, and they'll cut to what she's visualizing in the scene. And I'm assuming that was meant to, show the comedic genius of Lucille Ball. It kind of comes across as a little bit lame. I think it would have worked much better if they played it for comedy. That as people are talking about the scene and how they could play it and the different options they have on how to stage it and all of that, have that visualization in black and white start, and as they're discussing it, continue on with the voiceover and have the voiceover affecting what's happening in the scene. I think that could have been a funnier take on that. I mean, the way they do it isn't played for laughs, it's played to demonstrate the focus and how Lucy may have broken it down in her mind. But I think it could have been used in a better way. There's another point they make about just the control and the awareness she had of how a comedy should be made. And in the one main scene of this episode is a dinner scene with the four characters, and Fred and Ethel are fighting, and they have to sit together on this little bench at the dinner table together. And from the first moment they're rehearsing this scene, they have it situated so that the bench and Fred and Ethel will be sitting with their backs to the audience. And I could figure out in a couple of seconds that's not going to work. You're having a comedy scene which relies greatly on the business they're doing in front of them with the food and also their reactions. You're doing that with the audience not being able to see them. This is a show in its second season, hugely popular. Someone would have figured that out immediately. I can't even imagine that being a mistake that would have been made. But it's a big point later on, the night before the taping on Friday, that when Lucy and William Frawley and Vivian Vance go in to do some last-minute rehearsals, Lucy says, well, we need to move this bench. And yeah, that's true, but even a layman like me could figure that out pretty quickly. So if that's meant to illustrate her genius, I think you could have found any number of things that would have done that more effectively. As I said, towards the end of the movie, on the Friday, they're going to be shooting the episode. And I realized there was about 20 to 25 minutes left of the movie, And I kind of got excited for a minute that, oh, we might actually get to see almost, if not a whole episode played by this cast doing that episode of it. And I thought that could have been a way to show how, despite all the issues and all the problems we've been observing this whole time, the four of them can pull together, do a hilarious episode, and that this cast could emulate that and show that to the modern audience that is watching this movie. But they didn't. I mean, it focused on how Lucy was exonerated and her career was not ruined by this accusation. It probably wouldn't have worked that well, judging by the tone of the rest of the movie. It probably wouldn't have played that funny if they had tried to do more of that. But I just thought it could have been interesting. Speaking of Lucy being cleared or exonerated, the way that's shown in the movie is that Desi has gotten a call from J. Edgar Hoover himself, and how he lets him speak to the studio audience to let them know that she is 100% in the clear and there's no investigation. And that's not what happened in real life. I think there was a press conference of some kind from a politician that was the day before or earlier that day or something like that. And obviously not as dramatic. But when they did that, I thought, first of all, this was all going to be shown to have been something that was orchestrated by Desi, and that he would have had somebody just backstage, pretending to be J. Edgar Hoover, calling in, and that we would cut to that and how they kind of were able to save the show with some showmanship like that. It's not as played completely straight, but that's apparently what happened. It's not, though, as I was mentioning. But I just thought it was a joke they were going to be going for, and they didn't. One thing I will say is that it was fun seeing the I Love Lucy theme played by a live band when the audience is there on the set, and there's a band off to the side playing it live for them. And that was fun to see and to listen to and all of that. But I mean, it's not a major thing, but I'm looking for anything positive to mention about this movie. So I've been trying to think of a way to sum up this movie and this review, and I just think it's a fairly unpleasant movie to watch. It's not what I was hoping for. One other thing I should mention, unlike the series it's based on, this movie is decidedly not family friendly. There is quite a bit of foul language. I see no need for that. I think if you can tell a real life story with real life emotions just as well and better without having to go to what I think is also lazy writing, putting in lots of profanity. There are also suggestive scenes here too that I think are unnecessary. And overall, I'm just kind of a little bit baffled. I don't know who this movie is made for. For fans of the show. It hopefully won't, but it could kind of scuttle your enjoyment of a very famous show. And if you don't know the show, you're not going to come away from this movie wanting to watch it necessarily, because it looks dated. It looks like there was a lot of very unhappy people working together, and the fact that somehow a popular show came out of this seems like a mystery. So I don't know who the intended audience is for this. There's very little indication given as to why Lucille Ball became this iconic comedian on television. There's little bits, they show the scene from the stomping on the grapes and that type of thing, which looks good, but there too it's not really something played for laughs. It's just shown as something we recognize from the original version and how funny that was. I don't know why this movie had to turn out this way. I think there could have been a much more lighthearted way to tell this story. And you can still have those things about the possibility of her being blacklisted, or you can hint at Desi's infidelity without having to make it such a point that you hammer on over and over. I was just quite disappointed in the movie. So would I recommend it? No, I wouldn't. I think it was a missed opportunity, and if you're interested in this show, skip this movie and watch the show. You'll get much more enjoyment out of it. You'll come away with a much better mindset than I did after this movie, and that show is still a classic that can be viewed today. So, thank you for checking out this review. If you enjoyed it, please check back to my channel, Hildebrand Productions. Adios for now.